There is a reason the attacks did not stop, a reason the whispers grew louder the moment you chose silence, and a reason an entire community seemed to turn against you without explanation, without mercy, and without cause. This was not random. This was not coincidence. And this was not punishment. This was exposure, not your exposure, but theirs. When TMH places oil on a life, the unhealed cannot look away. They feel it before they understand it. They sense a disruption in the unseen order, something that does not respond to manipulation, something that does not bend, something that cannot be predicted. And when they cannot control it, they try to crush it. That is why the pressure intensified when you stopped explaining yourself. That is why resistance increased when you withdrew your energy. Your silence removed their leverage, and without access, all they could do was reveal themselves. What they meant to isolate you, God used to insulate you. The separation you felt was not abandonment, it was containment. Before we go any further, if this message is for you, comment, "I am chosen," like this video, and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but as an act of alignment. Now breathe, because what you are experiencing right now is not loneliness, it is divine containment. You are in a season where TMH has reduced external access to protect internal transformation. Oil attracts attention, but it also attracts friction. Those who live from wounds feel threatened by clarity. Those who survive on projection feel exposed by presence. You did not provoke them with words. You triggered them by existing unbothered, unmoved, and unowned. The reason the attacks felt coordinated is because spiritual exposure often looks like social rejection. When light enters a system built on shadows, the shadows panic. They label, distort, and gather consensus against what they cannot defeat individually. But understand this: consensus does not equal truth, and noise does not equal authority. The more they tried to define you, the clearer it became that they never knew you. That is why the attacks lacked logic. That is why explanations never satisfied them. This was never about your behavior. It was about your calling. TMH allowed you to see who could not walk with you into the next phase. Not to shame them, not to fight them, but to outgrow them. You were removed before contamination could occur. You were silenced so discernment could sharpen. You were isolated so strength could consolidate. This season is not comfortable, but it is precise. Every door that closed did so with intention. Every voice that turned against you did so on assignment, revealing where you no longer belonged. And what feels like stillness right now is not stagnation. It is calibration. You are being prepared in quiet ways for public clarity. What they tried to bury is being rooted deeper. What they tried to suppress is being fortified. You were not rejected, you were selected. Now, let's dive deeper. At first, you may have thought it was just one person, one misunderstanding, one conflict, one subtle tension that never fully resolved, or something small enough to ignore or rationalize away. But over time, something unusual and unmistakable began to unfold. The resistance did not fade. It multiplied. Conversations began to take place in rooms you were never invited into. Narratives were formed without your voice, and opinions solidified in your absence. Slowly, a shared perception emerged, and suddenly it was no longer an individual reacting to you, but an entire community aligning against you. This is not random behavior, and it is not coincidence. Spiritually and psychologically, collective opposition only forms when a presence threatens an unspoken order. You did not break rules, you did not openly challenge authority, and you did not seek conflict or domination. Your offense was far more subtle and far more powerful. You existed without permission. When the Most High places anointing on a life, it disrupts unconscious hierarchies that people rely on for their sense of safety and identity. They sense, often without words, that you cannot be easily controlled, labeled, minimized, or absorbed into their system. You move differently, think independently, and carry an inner authority that does not require validation. Communities built on sameness, conformity, and silent agreements feel endangered by individuals who carry divine variance. So they unify, not around truth or clarity, but around fear. What they called unity was actually shared insecurity. Each person felt an unexplainable discomfort in your presence, but none of them alone could justify it. So they needed numbers to make their unease feel legitimate. Gossip became a bonding ritual, exclusion became a defense mechanism, and misinterpretation became a weapon. The attack became collective because the anointing was undeniable. They could not name what set you apart, but they could feel it, and anything that cannot be controlled is often targeted. What you experienced was not rejection, it was recognition without understanding. The community did not gather because you were weak, flawed, or wrong, but because your existence exposed the fragility of their structure. Your silence challenged their noise, your authenticity threatened their performance, and your alignment disturbed their comfort. This phase was not meant to destroy you, it was meant to reveal who you are and who they are. What gathered against you was never strength, only a mirror of fear responding to divine presence. Point 2. Why your loneliness is not rejection, but containment. One of the deepest wounds you've carried is the feeling of being alone, not temporarily alone, not the kind of loneliness that can be fixed by meeting new people or changing your environment, but a deeper, quieter isolation that follows you even into crowded rooms, where laughter echoes and conversations flow, yet you remain unseen, untouched, and unrecognized at the level that matters. This kind of loneliness is often mistaken for rejection, as if something is wrong with you, as if you have been overlooked or left behind. But spiritually, it is not rejection at all. It is containment. TMH does not isolate vessels he plans to discard. He isolates vessels he plans to preserve, refine, and prepare. What you are experiencing is not emptiness, but protection, a narrowing of access around your spirit so that only what is aligned can reach you. Loneliness is often the evidence that too many incompatible energies have been removed at once, leaving a sudden quiet that feels unsettling only because you were once accustomed to noise. The reason casual companionship has faded is because your spirit can no longer tolerate shallow alignment. Conversations that once entertained you now feel hollow and draining, filled with repetition, performance, and unspoken tension. Relationships that once felt safe now feel intrusive, as though they require you to shrink, explain, or fragment yourself just to remain included. This is not arrogance, and it is not superiority, it is calibration. Your nervous system has learned the difference between peace and stimulation. Your intuition has become sharper, no longer numbed by constant social exchange. Your discernment has matured to the point where it recognizes subtle misalignment before it becomes harm. You are being protected from attachments that would dilute what is being formed within you, from bonds that demand access without honoring depth, and from dynamics that feed on your energy without contributing to your growth. This season is not about isolation for its own sake. It is about preservation of essence. Loneliness, in this context, is not the absence of love, not the sign that you are unloved or forgotten, but the absence of interference. It is the quiet space in which your true frequency stabilizes, where your identity is no longer negotiated, and where your spirit can finally breathe without interruption. Point 3. Why they couldn't stop watching you, even while attacking you. There's a paradox you may have noticed but never fully understood. The same people who criticized you, doubted you, or spoke against you never stopped watching you. Even after they dismissed you verbally, their attention remained fixed. They studied your reactions in silence, tracked your movements from a distance, and measured your emotional responses. They waited for collapse, for a public mistake, for bitterness to leak through your composure. Psychologically, this is obsession disguised as judgment. When someone truly moves on, they stop observing. Constant monitoring is not indifference. It is unresolved fixation. Spiritually, however, it reveals something deeper: witness preparation. TMH does not elevate in secret without witnesses present. Before promotion, there must be observers, not supporters, but witnesses, because vindication must be undeniable when it arrives. Your restraint became the test. Your refusal to explain yourself disrupted their narrative. Your silence removed the feedback loop they depended on to feel superior. Silence is unbearable to those who rely on noise, reaction, and emotional chaos to validate their sense of control. They needed you to break, because your breaking would justify their hostility. But you didn't. Instead, you became quieter, steadier, and more internally grounded. That confused them. Pressure reveals what is real, and what was placed on you was not fragile. They expected heat to destroy you, but heat does not evaporate oil. It clarifies it. Under pressure, your discernment sharpened, your patience deepened, your identity stabilized. What they mistook for passivity was discipline. What they labeled weakness was containment. You were not inactive, you were incubating. TMH often hides growth in stillness so that observers miscalculate timing. They assumed your silence meant stagnation, but it meant alignment. While they watched for emotional leakage, your anointing matured quietly, strengthening beneath the surface. This is why they couldn't look away. Something in them sensed that what they were witnessing was not decline, but preparation. When elevation arrives after restraint, it exposes every false narrative that was spoken in the waiting season. That is why they had to see it. That is why they stayed. Not because you were failing, but because, on a deeper level, they knew you weren't. Point 4. The hidden protection phase that feels like emptiness. Protection is often misunderstood. Many expect protection to feel like abundance, affirmation, applause, and visible support. They imagine it arriving as open doors, constant encouragement, and a steady stream of confirmation from people around them. But the most powerful form of divine protection rarely feels like gain. It feels like subtraction. It feels like emptiness. Doors close without explanation. Messages go unanswered. Invitations quietly stop arriving. Familiar connections fade, not through conflict, but through silence. This is not rejection, and it is not punishment. This is preservation. TMH does not protect chosen ones by surrounding them with constant access. He protects them by reducing access. Too much exposure too early invites misuse. Too many voices dilute discernment. Too much familiarity invites projection, entitlement, and distortion. In this phase, your life was intentionally narrowed, so your essence could stabilize before expansion. You were stripped of external reference points, so your identity could anchor internally, beyond applause, beyond titles, beyond borrowed validation. The emptiness forced you inward when distraction would have kept you fragmented. The silence refined your perception when noise would have kept you confused. The absence of validation trained you to recognize divine confirmation instead of human approval. This season was uncomfortable because it removed counterfeit reassurance, the kind that soothes the ego but weakens authority. It removed praise that inflates rather than aligns. It removed relationships that fed on your light without honoring its source. What felt like isolation was insulation. What felt like loss was recalibration. TMH was not pushing people away to harm you. He was creating distance to prevent contamination. A chosen vessel cannot be endlessly accessed and remain clear. Oil must settle before it can be poured. This phase trained you to stand without leaning, to trust without proof, and to remain steady without applause. Only a grounded vessel can carry sustained anointing without distortion. When doors reopen, they will open with precision. When recognition comes, it will not define you, because you already know who you are. Point 5. Why their energy toward you has shifted recently. If you pay attention, you'll notice something has changed. The intensity of opposition has softened, not because they suddenly became kind, but because the fuel they once fed on is no longer available. The aggression has dulled, the sharpness in their tone has faded, and the certainty behind their words has weakened. This shift is not external, it is internal. Something within you has stabilized. You're no longer leaking emotional energy into environments that were designed to drain you. You no longer over-explain, over-defend, or overextend yourself to people who were never equipped to understand you in the first place. Psychologically, this is powerful because it removes leverage. When a person can no longer provoke a reaction, they lose control. When they can no longer predict your emotional response, their strategy collapses. Spiritually, this stabilization signals the completion of a cycle. You have passed through the phase where pain was your teacher, where misunderstanding was your training ground, and where isolation refined your discernment. They may not admit it openly, but they feel the shift. They sense that you are no longer accessible to projection, no longer a mirror for their unresolved insecurities. Anointing reaches a point where it becomes non-reactive, where silence carries more authority than explanation, and presence speaks louder than performance. At this stage, you are not trying to be seen, validated, or chosen. You are simply anchored. And when that happens, opposition loses momentum. People who once thrived on conflict begin to retreat, not because you confronted them, but because there is nothing left to attach to. They are being forced, not by argument, not by defense, not by proof, but by observation alone, to acknowledge that you are sustained by something beyond human approval. Your consistency unsettles them. Your calm exposes them. Your stability confirms that what they were attacking was never fragile to begin with. This is why the noise fades. This is why the attacks slow down. This is why the narrative shifts behind closed doors. You didn't win by overpowering them. You outgrew the battlefield entirely. And now, whether they understand it consciously or not, they are watching someone who is no longer surviving, but standing, rooted, sealed, and carried by a source they cannot touch, manipulate, or diminish. Point 6. Your silence was the real test. Contrary to what many believe, TMH was not evaluating your attackers. He was observing you, watching the quiet decisions you made when no applause followed you, when misunderstandings surrounded you like fog. The question was never whether they were wrong. The question was whether you would abandon your center to prove your innocence. Would you defend your image or protect your spirit? Would you exhaust yourself explaining truth to those who had already chosen distortion? Would you chase validation, approval, and temporary comfort, or would you remain aligned with truth even when that alignment isolated you, even when it stripped you of familiarity and ease? Silence was placed before you as a blade and a shield. Many mistook it for weakness, but silence is mastery. Silence is the language of those who understand timing. You learned when not to speak, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You learned when explanation becomes self-betrayal, when clarity offered to the wrong ears turns sacred truth into currency for mockery. You learned that your peace was more valuable than being believed, that your integrity didn't need witnesses to remain intact. While others grew louder, you grew deeper. While others reacted, you observed. While others performed righteousness, you practiced restraint. This was not passive endurance. This was disciplined strength. Every moment you chose alignment over reaction, you passed another layer of the test. Not once, but consistently, quietly, repeatedly. Heaven records patterns, not performances. And because you did not break character under pressure, because you did not fracture when provoked, and because you trusted TMH to vindicate what you refused to advertise, the season is shifting now. Doors are moving that you never touched. Tables are turning without your involvement. What once required defense will now require discernment, because the same silence they mocked is the authority they will soon feel. Point 7. What happens after recognition, not apology. Here is what many chosen ones misunderstand. Vindication does not come with apologies. It comes with exposure to reality. They will not suddenly support you. They will not confess wrongdoing. They will simply grow quiet. Silence will replace accusation. Distance will replace interference. TMH does not humiliate your opposition. He reveals outcomes. Your life will speak without commentary. Your stability will answer questions you never addressed. And the same community that tried to define you will be forced to witness that they never had authority to do so. You were never meant to be understood by the crowd. You were meant to be recognized by heaven. Stay still. Stay grounded. What isolated you is now distinguishing you, and what they once tried to suppress is now undeniable. TMH has not finished.